Hello everybody, welcome back. Of course, a couple of weeks ago I posted a video called Islam Hinders the Intellect, and there I argue that Muslims aren't inherently less intelligent than other people, however they are blinded ideologically. And of course I compare it to Muslims putting on a pair of glasses and they see the world through their Islamic lens and it distorts it. Now, as a Christian, I'm primarily concerned with the way they distort the Bible through the lens of the Quran. And I talked a little bit about that in that video, and this video is a follow-up in the sense that we're going to go through some comments that Muslims have posted either on that video or since that video and show how they are demonstrably distorting the Bible. And so I'm going to expose this here publicly and, of course, invite them to respond. So let's jump right into it. All right, so this individual says, try once more. What does Jesus mean when he said in John 17:4, I have finished the work which thou had given me, or to me, but he didn't know he had to be sacrificed. I am sure that the crucifixion was imposed on him accidentally, which he never expected. So this individual's point is, okay, first of all, he handpicks John 17:4, and then says, Jesus said he finished the work, but he hadn't been crucified yet, so his work wasn't finished, so Jesus didn't know what he was talking about. The crucifixion took him by surprise. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these claims. First of all, let's just scroll through John 17 here. This is 17:1. Let me drag the magnifier up here a little bit. After Jesus said this, he looked toward heaven and prayed. Now, would a Muslim believe that? No, because Muslims don't pray looking toward heaven. So, can't use 17:1. Father, the hour has come. Would Muslims agree with this? No, because calling God Father. Glorify your Son. Again, Father-Son language and glorification language. Not going to happen. For you granted him authority over all, even over all, that he might give eternal life. So Jesus has authority over all, and he gives eternal life. Would Muslims agree with this? No, they wouldn't. Now, this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ. Do Muslims believe that having eternal life is through Jesus Christ? No, they don't. Okay, so this is how Muslims read the Bible and how they present these sorts of objections. No, they can't use 17:1 or 2 or 3, but they can use 4, at least they think they can, to prove that Christianity is somehow incoherent, or Jesus was surprised by the crucifixion. So, first of all, let's look at this language here in 17:1. Jesus says, Father, the hour has come. Now, what is the hour? Well, let's let Matthew 26 elucidate that. This is Jesus. He says, Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. So Jesus refers to an hour or a certain time, or in Matthew 26, an appointed time. And then Jesus predicts his betrayal. So further, Gospel of Mark, Jesus predicts his death, Mark 8:31, Mark 9:31, 10:33. You can read those passages if you like. 17:22, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. Of course, that's Matthew's Gospel. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life. So he predicts his death there. He predicts his death in Matthew 20. And in Luke as well, but we'll skip to John 3:14. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. Okay, this is John's language for the crucifixion and also for the glorification. John casts the crucifixion somewhat, according to some interpreters, along with the ascension, Jesus' glorification. So a little background here. Isaiah 52:13. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. So you can see how you have the suffering servant passage in Isaiah 52, where being lifted up is very closely associated with exalted. So there's a model in the Old Testament that John may be drawing from, and the other New Testament writers, who use the same verb there, lifted up, in the context of Jesus' exaltation later on. Jesus, in the very same passage that this person cites, 17:1, namely, Jesus talks about the hour has come, okay? He predicts his death and sometimes specifically says by crucifixion, several times in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, and in John, with John's characteristic language of being lifted up. And then this person wants to pull off of John 17:4 and say, well, Jesus didn't know he was being crucified. I mean, how do you do this as a Muslim? If you're a Muslim who clings to this sort of interpretation, how do you do this? Do you just ignore the rest of the texts that you don't want to see? I mean, how does this happen? Do you just not know that Jesus predicted his death several times throughout the Gospels, as I clearly showed? These types of questions shouldn't even be answered. Plus, if you dig just a little bit, a very little bit, you can go from John 17:4 to John 17:1 and see that Jesus is actually talking about the hour, okay? Now, further, I want to make another point, and that is that Jesus often speaks with assurance of future events as if they've already happened. So let's just use an example right here from the Gospel of John, the same chapter, chapter 17. While I was with them, I protected them and kept them safe. So Jesus here, after this prayer, he hooks up with his disciples and goes somewhere else. So Jesus is clearly still with them, but he speaks about it in past tense, while I was with them. Okay, so you might hear a word proleptically. Okay, sometimes some commentators will use this. Jesus speaks proleptically, and it means that he speaks about future events with the assurance of events that have already happened in the past. Okay, so that's John 17:4. But again, that's not something I would expect a Muslim to pick up on, that last thing that I mentioned. However, I would expect a Muslim to know that Jesus predicted his own death, even by crucifixion. So again, you just have to be almost dishonest to treat John 17:4 like this. All right, let's go to the next one. Scroll down to it here. Okay, and this is a lengthy comment. It's a lengthy comment. Whenever you get lengthy comments, whenever I get lengthy comments, I copy-paste them into Google, and you can see where they came from. Or in this case, you can just read it. Let's look at this phrase. There is not a single clear script in the complete Bible that is not mysterious or explicit statement where Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, he says, I am God, worship me. That sounds a lot like Zakir Naik. And then he quotes a lot of passages, a lot like Zakir Naik. And then at the end, he says, we Muslims are more Christians than the Christians themselves. That's Zakir Naik. How do I know that? Because of this.
We Muslims are more Christian than the Christian themselves. More Christian than the Christian themselves. More Christian than the Christian themselves.
So if you're going to quote someone, at least have the intellectual honesty to attribute the quote to them. Okay, that's the first thing. And that goes for if you're quoting a person or a website. That happens a lot as well. Why would you pass off someone else's work as your own, especially when it's as bad as this? I mean, you're going to copy-paste, and this happens a lot. Muslims will copy-paste large portions from Islamic websites and will not say that they're quoting from anyone. You just put it back in Google, and you can see exactly word for word where it comes from. So this person, again, Zakir Naik, okay, if you want to have some credibility on my channel, don't quote Zakir Naik. Let me give you a short list of people you can quote and have more credibility than if you're quoting Zakir Naik. Okay, short list. Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, even Minnie Mouse, Wonder Woman, Popeye, you get the picture. Zakir Naik has zero credibility. All right, so back to this person's comment. Gospel of John, chapter 5. Let's see what the Gospel of John, chapter 5 says. Verse 18, for this reason they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Okay, now this is not the verse they're going to quote from John chapter 5. Instead, they are going to quote from, well, he quoted from John 5:30 and John 5:26, as well as John 5:19. So he literally starts right after the verse I just quoted. Again, as a Muslim, what do? Do you just not read the verse I just read, which was John 5:18, but you skip right to 20? I mean, how does that work? Jesus' contemporaries realized that he was making himself equal with God. Okay, if you want to go to a passage that if you want to try to show that Jesus was not God, don't go to the Gospel of John. I mean, how do you read John's prologue? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelled among us. God dwelling with his people. It's right there in the Gospel of John. How are you going to skip all of that and go to chapter 5 and try to prove that Jesus wasn't God? And again, you have to skip verses within chapter 5, right? So what's the deal here with the language that we see that Muslims quote all the time from the Gospels? Well, what you have is language in the Gospels, whether it's from Jesus or the Gospel writers themselves, that is appropriate for man and appropriate for God. God incarnate. That's what the Gospel of John says. That's how it begins. God became flesh and dwelled among us. So when Muslims quote texts that show the humanity of Jesus, Christians are saying, yeah, that's what we believe. Yeah, you find texts that describe fully Jesus' humanity. And you also find texts that describe fully Jesus' deity. And these are the texts that Muslims skip. Okay, so let me see, who is this individual here? Put his name back up. Yes. So, yeah, this individual right here. I would like to see your exegesis of John chapter 1. Okay, you want to quote from the Gospel of John. Let me see your exegesis of John chapter 1. And so I'll be waiting for that. All right, let's move on to the next comment here. All right, so here we have a comment right here from this individual. 1 John 4:2. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they're from God, for many false prophets have gone into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. Did Muhammad, P, confess that Jesus, P, has come in the flesh? Yes, he did. And what does this make Muhammad, P? According to the Bible, it makes him a true prophet. So in response to this, first of all, I challenge the individual to show me where Muhammad says that Jesus came in the flesh. That's the first thing. Secondly, what does John mean by this statement that Jesus came in the flesh? And I put all of this in the comments to this individual, which he rejected. But let's go through. We'll sort of replay the explanation that I gave him. So there are some similarities between 1 John chapter 4, 1 John in general, and the Gospel of John. Okay, let's look at some examples. 1 John 1:1, that which was from the beginning. Gospel of John 1:1, in the beginning. 1 John 1:1, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. Gospel of John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word. 1 John 1:2, the life appeared. Gospel of John 1:4, in him was life. 1 John 1:2, the life appeared, and we have seen it and testified to it. Gospel of John 1:14, we have seen his glory. 1 John 1:5, God is light. Gospel of John 1:4, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. 1 John 1:5, in him there is no darkness at all. Gospel of John 1:5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. 1 John 4:2, every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. Gospel of John 1:14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. So, there's a similarity here between John's epistle and the Gospel of John. So if we want to ask, what does John mean when he says that Jesus Christ came in the flesh? What does that mean? Let's check the Gospel of John. 1 John 4:2, every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. Gospel of John 1:14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. So this is why when you look this verse up, namely 1 John 4:2, or the whole passage, 1 John 4, if you just look it up on Bible Gateway or something like that, you'll see that there's a heading, and the heading is typically something related to the incarnation, maybe on denying the incarnation, where John is addressing people who deny this. When John says Jesus came in the flesh, he's talking about God incarnate. This is crystal clear if you simply allow John to interpret himself. Now, Muslims don't know what it's like to have one text interpret other parts of that text. Oh, wait. Except for to seek to explain an ayah from the Quran by referring to another ayah is the first and foremost duty of the interpreter. Okay, so there is that. And there's also the most correct method of tafsir is to explain the Quran by the Quran. Okay, so maybe Muslims do know something about letting the Quran interpret itself. Now, why not extend that same freedom to the Bible and let the Bible interpret itself? Well, you can't do that because that will lend too much coherence and credibility to the Christian faith. We can't have that now, can we? No, we can't. If you're a dishonest Muslim like the one I'm engaging with here, you can't have that, so you just have to reject it altogether. And so that's what this person has done. Now, I brought this up. Secular scholars and historians confirm Jesus was a man. Does this mean they're from God? He responded, if they claim to be prophets, then according to 1 John 4:2, yes. So you have modern-day John here walking down the street, and he runs into an atheist. And John says to the atheist, do you believe that Jesus was human? And the atheist says, yes. John would then reply, according to this person, you have a spirit from God. I mean, everybody believes that Jesus was a human, except for the vanishingly small fringe scholars over there who say that Jesus never existed. But that doesn't obviously include any Muslims. Muslims believe that Jesus actually existed, and everybody believes that Jesus was human. So according to this individual's exegesis of 1 John 4, everybody has a spirit from God. Okay, now this is just absurd, and it's much more appropriate to let the Bible interpret itself. This phrase that John uses referring to Jesus coming in the flesh, he uses it in his prologue. There are unmistakable parallels between 1 John and the Gospel of John, as I demonstrated, and so that is the proper exegesis of 1 John 4:2. Now, to this, I clarified that this individual was approaching troll status, which I said that sincerely, and this whole comment was turning into a comment thread was turning into a waste of time. 85 replies here. You can see it went back and forth. But this individual said, fascinating. The guy actually thinks he will have a noticeable effect on Islam because he has posted some YouTube videos talk about illusions of grandeur. Okay, so I don't think I'm going to have a noticeable effect on Islam. Islam is an ideology. Okay, it's abstract. Okay, it's like a number. To have a noticeable effect on Islam is as incoherent as saying a noticeable effect on the number 7. All right, I don't think I'm going to have a noticeable effect on Islam. Rather, I think I'm going to have a noticeable effect on people who hold to the ideology of Islam, namely Muslims. Okay, so that's the correct way to say that first. Secondly, I know I have had an impact on Muslims based on personal conversations. Now, you can't tell what's going on behind a keyboard, obviously, so it's more difficult on YouTube. But I have had an effect, and I know that to be true. Now, this individual, again, sort of taunting here, which is what I was referring to with the troll status. So I have illusions of grandeur. Well, you know what? I mean, I may affect Muslims through this channel, especially as it grows. Maybe not, but I'll try. And you know what I will never be is a coward who hides behind his keyboard, because I challenge this individual to a conversation, not a debate. A debate takes prep time and so forth, just a conversation. You call in, I'll record it, and I'll post it on my channel, and we can talk about this issue here in real time. Now, I asked 3 to 4 times, and every time I was refused. He said, YouTube comments or nothing. He's afraid to talk, in spite of all of his at least mask of confidence. He's afraid to engage with me in real time. So, I don't have illusions of grandeur here, certainly, but I definitely see some traces of cowardice on his part. Okay, so next comment. All right, this individual right here says, if the prophet speaks in the Lord's name but his prediction does not happen or come true, you will know that the Lord did not give that message. The prophet has spoken without my authority and need not be feared. Yet Jesus said, truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man in his kingdom. So they're referring here to Matthew 16:28. I'll just put it up on the screen, which reads as he quoted it. And so this is Jesus here saying that there's an event that will happen, and some who are listening to him will not taste death until that event happens. Now, this person, as many do, makes numerous assumptions about this. Let me just pull up where I highlighted them. Number one, you assume this is referring to Parousia, that is Jesus' second coming. Number two, I said that he assumed this refers to a single event. Number three, you assume coming in the phrase Son of Man coming in his kingdom means coming to earth. There is no basis for this assumption. Okay, so let's go back to the text and just read it. This person, again, assumes that Jesus is referring to his second coming. Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So Jesus here is implicitly, if not explicitly, saying they will die after this event happens. You will not taste death before, okay? Not taste death before. So we have some chronology there. Again, Jesus is very strongly implying, if not stating explicitly, that they will die after. Now, if Jesus here is talking about his second coming, that is a very, very odd second coming. So Jesus, he comes a second time, and then you die. That's not exactly what they had in mind for their view of eschatology. So the text itself gives you a very strong indication that this is not Parousia, or Jesus' second coming. So what is Jesus talking about here? Well, I suggest in my comments to this individual that you need to take Daniel 7 as the background for this. Now, Daniel 7, 13 through 14 is referred to by Jesus in other parts of the Gospels. Okay, so this is nothing new, and I've actually covered some of these in my series on the Gospel of Mark, and I think some in my video on Acts, but I'm not sure about that. But regardless, it's been covered in the Gospel of Mark. So let's jump in here to Daniel 7, 13. And there before me was one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. Okay, so which direction is the coming? Let's read it again. Coming with the clouds of heaven, he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. So it's not a coming to earth, rather it's a coming to heaven. Again, it's from the perspective of the person having this vision, namely Daniel. Okay, so the coming then is to the Ancient of Days, to the Father, to heaven, to glory. Okay, now there's another element. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. Again, Daniel 7, 13 through 14. Now, let's couple this with what Jesus says in Matthew 28. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. That's Matthew 28. And then you have Matthew 16 again. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So if you just assume that Jesus in Matthew chapter 16 is referring to his second coming, and then it turns out that the second coming didn't happen, what that means is it's a problem with your assumption, because you're reading your assumption into the text. However, if you take Daniel 7 as the background, coupled with what Jesus said in Matthew 28, Jesus is talking about his ascension, which some of Jesus' contemporaries saw not long after the Great Commission, which occurred in Matthew 28. So what does Jesus mean when he says, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom? Again, read it with Daniel 7, 13 through 14 as the background. Jesus coming to his kingdom with authority and power. Daniel 7, Matthew 28, the ascension of Jesus. Okay? So, and it's a very simple explanation. All it requires you to do is take some other text into account. Daniel 7, Matthew 28. And again, if you're familiar with my channel, this should be nothing new. I've covered some of this material in the past. Now, this individual in response said, you are the one who just lied with this vapid interpretation. Okay, so imagine a Muslim and a Christian at a debate, a formal debate. And the Muslim gets up and says, Jesus said such and such in Matthew 16, but that didn't happen. So according to biblical criteria, he's a false prophet. Then he sits down. The Christian gets up and says, actually, no, if you take Daniel 7 as the background for Matthew 16, and you take into account what Jesus said in Matthew 28, Jesus' ascension, his coming on the clouds to the Ancient of Days with authority, that's actually his ascension. Okay, it's not the second coming. And then the Christian sits down. The Muslim gets up and says, that's a vapid interpretation. I win. Well, did you really? No, you didn't. You just dismissed with a wave of your hand everything I said because you don't like that I gave you textual background that made perfect sense of Matthew chapter 16. You don't like it, so you just have to deny it. Now, this happens so frequently that I predicted this would happen, and I predicted it in the actual comment with the explanation. So I predicted it, and this person knew I predicted it. And guess what? He still fulfilled the prediction. Let's look at what I said. I predicted, no doubt your response to this will be more proof of that. It will be a wholesale dismissal of my response without actually engaging in any of the text I present. Maybe you'll throw a couple more red herrings out, but whatever you do, you will continue to dodge the content I present in this video. Super User got in on this, and he said that this individual would deliberately beguile and delude in order to defend his faith. Okay, so think about that. Deliberate delusion, a wholesale dismissal, and that's exactly what this person does. It's a vapid interpretation. It's vapid. It's vapid. Again, intellectually irresponsible. So, what is going through Muslims' minds with stuff like this? Is it just, do you deny it and you know that I'm right, or is your intellect so handicapped by your ideology that you can't even see the text in black and white? It's very difficult to understand how someone can be this intellectually irresponsible. I can't help but think of Jesus' words in John chapter 8 when it comes to Muslims reading the Bible. But because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. So there you have it, some examples right from the comments section here that illustrate my point perfectly. Islam hinders the intellect. It prevents Muslims from seeing the biblical text clearly, and it requires them to dismiss sound exegesis, the Bible interpreting itself. They dismiss that with the wave of their hand because their ideology requires them to see something different. It's interesting. I was at a conference recently, and I have to share this, and then I'll wrap up this lengthy video. I was at a conference recently with 6 scholars, and 4 of them were Old Testament specialists. And so I was talking to one before the day of the conference. We talked for a long time. It was a very enjoyable conversation. This is someone who spends his academic life in the Old Testament and in peer-reviewed literature about the Old Testament. And someone who works with Muslims, I said, hey, do you know, he teaches Deuteronomy, actually, which triggered this comment. I said, do you know that Muslims believe that Muhammad is in Deuteronomy 18? And his jaw hit the floor. He had never heard anything like this. Of course, he didn't believe it. Okay, but set that aside. Catch what I said. He had never even heard of it. He spends his life in peer-reviewed literature on the Old Testament. He teaches Deuteronomy. He goes to academic conferences across the country, and he's never even heard this, which shows you how far separated Muslims are with their twisted interpretation of the Bible. So I'm offering again to Muslims whose comments I address in this video. If you want to call in on Skype, video or audio, if you don't want video, no problem. I understand that. I'll record an audio conversation with video on my side, audio on your side, and I'll post that unedited on my channel here, and having video on my side will prove that it's unedited because you would see, of course, a glitch in the video. So if you think you can sustain your distorted interpretation of the Bible that I have argued against here, then call in and see if you can keep your views, see if you can argue for your views with me in real time. That's an open challenge, and it's something I take very seriously as a Christian who is dedicated to expounding what the Bible actually says to Muslims, in spite of the fact that their ideology continues to require them to resist sound exegesis. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and Muslims, remember my invitation to dialogue with me here in real time. Thanks for watching.